Here. I was born and brought up in Rajasthan, so it's a nice opportunity for me to speak in my home state. And in fact, I'm pretty happy to see the campus here being designed eco-friendly way. In fact, I would just spend a few seconds talking about this issue. So when I go to my home and I stand on the roof, I see Aravali all around. And I come here and I see Aravali again and I feel very nostalgic about it. I feel very happy. And I'm thankful to NIT University that they designed the campus in an eco-friendly manner, because I have been seeing the ruins of the Aravali in my hometown, and they are taking care of the ecosystem. There can be nothing better than this. So the concept of the air tunnels, the concept of not using ACs, not cutting a single tree, I mean, that's a wonderful thing, and I must appreciate NIT for that. So I work on the cryptanalysis of hash functions, and tab 128 is one such hash function. So I'll speak about what they are, but about the names there, I'll just mention that this work was actually started by Iranian PhD student Masoum Safwani and her supervisor Majid Naderi. And I have a friend in Denmark, the Technical University of Denmark, Praveen Gorav, who was externally supervising this girl student, and they were unable to break this hash function. Since I work in this area and Praveen is my friend, he sent the work to me and said, can you please try to break it? I broke it combinatorially, I found certain weaknesses, and then it required some effort to program and show that the attack actually works. That programming was done by intern from IIT Kharagpur working with me, Ashish Kumar. So this is the work. So I'll briefly speak on these 3 points. What are the cryptographic hash functions? What is tab 128 and how to break it? So cryptographic hash functions are essentially, you can think of them as a black box. You give any input, any length message, 0, 1 to the power star here. So any length message, and you compress it to a small size, a fixed bit, 10-bit kind of a thing. And you think of the hash functions as giving you a digest of the given message. And this figure shows you that this is an n-bit hash function. So we say n-bit hash function depending on the output of the hash function. Now, an immediate question is, are this mathematical construct of any use? In fact, we've already heard the term hash on most of the algorithm or the data structure courses. So you know that this is very useful. Hashes are very useful in the bucket sort and this searching and so on. The cryptographic hash functions are slightly different from those hash functions, because the aim of those hash functions is nothing but divide things into buckets. So you don't require more properties than that. All you need is uniform kind of a distribution on the input, that they will be divided into different buckets almost uniformly. Whereas cryptographic hash functions also need to satisfy certain additional properties. So I'll come to that a little later. But first let me come to this. Why do we need such constructs actually? So these are some of the reasons that we need hash functions. So we all know the issue of signs, the signatures. So you cut a check and sign on it and say that please pay this much money from my account to this person. So when we move things to digital world, now we need digital signatures. So there is an essential difference between the signatures on paper world and the signatures in the digital world. On paper world, you sign the same way on each check you write. You sign the same way on every paper that you write. But in digital world, it immediately causes a concern that if you sign a paper in a digital world by some signature, anybody can copy it now. Very easy to copy, very easy to forge the same thing on any other message. And I sign a message to you saying that please deduct 100 rupees from my account and pay to person X. The same signature can immediately be copied and somebody can make it 1,000 rupees or 10,000 rupees. So the only way to prevent it would be that the signature should not only depend on the person who is signing, but also on the document which is being signed. So now it is the signature, digital signature is not just a function of the person, but it's also a function of the person, comma, the message. Now we come to the message part. So we have a message. As soon as the message changes, the signature will change. And that would bring us to the issue of public key cryptography and how to manage. So I'm not going into the issues of how to manage digital signatures, but all I would say is that digital signatures would require such a thing. The other point is now, you may have to sign, say, a document on paper world of 100 pages. So government people would know that they typically sign on each page, certified signature, next page, certified signature. So court documents, for example. So people pay money to get a court judgment certified by the court, because somebody in the court signs on each page that gives you a copy of the judgment. So each page has to be certified. In the digital world also similar thing would happen, because we now need to sign on each page of a big document, and that causes efficiency problems. You cannot sign so many times. The typical way we use is, given a message, you would compress it to a small size, that is where the hash function would be used, and then you will not sign the document, you will sign the hash value of that document. So that is where the cryptographic hash functions are useful. The other is the classical use of storing password in Unix systems, for example, and in fact nowadays everybody uses the same system, that you want to log into a system, so your password has to be stored somewhere. But if you store plain text passwords, then anybody who can read that particular file, even the admin, would know your password. And then he could steal it, he could tell it to other people, or some other new threats would come up, because the information is possibly reachable for some people. So what typically would be done, famously given in the Ken Thompson paper many years ago, is that you would never store the passwords as such. You would hash them and keep the hash value stored as the password. So immediately you would know that one requirement for cryptographic hash functions would be that it should be almost impossible to invert them back. So given a hash value, you should not be able to find the message. Otherwise, you would have broken the security of the password system. So we will come to that. And finally, hash functions are essentially one of the essential cryptographic primitives, the other two being block ciphers and stream ciphers. So block ciphers, stream ciphers, hash functions. These three are the building blocks of most of the cryptographic protocols. And what are the requirements we require from the hash functions? So these are there are many, but I have chosen the three most important ones. So the first one we require is that it should be extremely difficult to find collisions. That is, you shouldn't be able to find two messages, x1 and x2, which are different but which hash to the same value. Why? Because suppose I have a message which I am trying to sign, and the value comes out to be, after the hash, it comes out to be some x1. If I can find, h of x1. Now, if I can find another message x2, which also hashes to the same value, then the digital signature on the two messages would be identical. And the security of the digital signature would be compromised. So we don't want a cryptographic hash function to be easy to find collisions. Now, again, we need a small discussion on what we mean by easy. Because if you look at this picture again, we are trying to compress something. It's very clear from this figure that there are going to be a large number of inputs for which the same value of output will be reached. Essentially because we are compressing. So when you compress a larger domain into a smaller domain, you are bound to have collisions existing in the system. So there will be many inputs for which the same output will be reached. So that's nothing but just a pigeonhole principle. So what we say is that it should be computationally difficult, and I will come to the computationally difficult part a little later. So what we mean is, if there is an n-bit function, n-bit hash function, there are certain kinds of attack which would take about 2 to the power n by 2 effort. So anything better than 2 to the power n by 2 would be known as a break of the hash function, because 2 to the power n by 2 we have generic attacks against the hash function. Same way now, as we were giving the example of passwords. So if we know the hash value of the password, we should not be able to find the password. So we shouldn't be able to invert the hash function, which is the pre-image resistance. And very similar to the collision resistance is the second pre-image resistance, but it is a slightly higher demand. A higher demand because in the first one, collision resistance, we are simply saying that the hash function should not give us collisions. Means randomly find message x1 and x2, which collide. But in the pre-image, the second pre-image resistance, we are saying that given a value, now find another value which will collide. So the first and the third are slightly different. The third one is a difficult problem to solve in comparison to the first one. And these are the requirements on the security. So if we have an n-bit output, there are some attacks. So I'm not going into the attacks as such, but some attacks which would say the collision can be broken in 2 to the power n by 2 effort. The famous attack is actually known as the birthday attack. And the second, for the pre-image resistance, if you have an n-bit output and you try roughly 2 to the power n inputs, you are likely to find a collision. And you are likely to find a pre-image of a given message. So that is what is meant by this generic attack of 2 to the power n. And the second pre-image resistance also has the generic attack, which is 2 to the power n effort. So what do we mean by a break of a hash function is that either you breach the security bounds, or sometimes the designers would also claim certain things about the hash functions. Can you break those claims? So if you can break those claims, then this is said to be a break on the hash function. So now how do you design hash functions? So that is the important problem. How do you design a function which compresses a large input into a small input and still have these kind of properties that we want out of it? So Merkle and Demgard, in 2 independent papers in the same conference, Crypto 89, they gave a design which is now known as Merkle-Demgard construction. So Merkle-Demgard construction started with saying that you make a small compression function which is collision resistant. So you do something like this, that given 160 bits, you will produce a 128-bit output. Now, how do you design? That is where the designers of hash functions will come into picture. There will be different designs and so on. But the overall structure of the hash function will be like this, that you will use this f function, which is the compression function. So you will take this compression function with 2 inputs, the message part and the initialization vector part, so IV part, which we are denoting here by a hash value x0, so which is the starting hash value. And with these two, you will produce something called h1. And the message you are assuming is a very big message. And this compression function is just working on a small part. So this is a small compression function, and its domain is being extended by this Merkle-Demgard construction. So this small compression function is this, small f. It is being iterated over and over again by breaking this given message m into multiple blocks. So if the message is not really a multiple of the block size, you could actually pad it with some schemes and you can make it a multiple of the block size. So this M1 is of a certain block size, let's say 512 bits, M2 is also 512 bits, Mk is also 512 bits. So now your compression function f, which was taking an input 512 bits to some length n, so 512 plus n bits, it is compressing to an n-bit function. But now we have extended it to include a large input k into 512 bits and giving a final output of hk up to here. Then to resist against certain kinds of attacks, it is better that you also give a final compression function g, some final transformation g, which will take this hk and produce h of m. So h of m is the hash value which we say final. So there are some theorems proved by Merkle and Demgard that if the function f is collision resistant, then the whole construction is collision resistant. So that is the reason that people use the Merkle-Demgard construction. And the crucial issue here is how to design the small f function. So there are many hash functions. Some of these I have listed here. So most prominent ones, there are many, but these are the most prominent ones, generic hash functions. So MD4 and MD5, which were designed by Ronald Rivest, and they were broken by the Chinese group of Wang, Xiaoyun Wang. The SHA-0 was broken by Xiaobu Zhu in the French people and the Wang group again. And SHA-1 is again broken by Wang. On SHA-2 we have the best results so far, so it's not yet fully broken. But a certain number of rounds can be broken. So my thesis contains the best attacks on SHA-2 so far. And SHA-3, so NIST is designing this SHA-1, SHA-2 family. So secure hash algorithm. So the National Institute of Statistics and Technology by the US. So they came up with the idea of why not design some hash functions on their own. So they started this development SHA-0. So they developed SHA-0, and after an year they wrote, due to some some weaknesses in the scheduling algorithm of SHA, the hash function SHA. We are modifying it slightly, and they called it the new hash function. Now this is the modified SHA. So the academic community started calling them SHA-0 and SHA-1. SHA-0 is the one which was unmodified, and SHA-1 is the one which was modified. The NIST did not even announce what was the weakness that they found. They simply mentioned on the website, due to a certain weakness in the hash function, we are modifying it slightly. And all they did was, in one step of the computation, they made a one-bit rotation in the value. Nobody knew in the academic community why they did that. So, after a few years, Shabu and Zhu actually made an attack against SHA-0, and they showed that actually its collision can be broken in much less effort than to the power n by 2. And they said that probably this is the reason that NIST already found being added by the NSA. And that is the reason that SHA-1 came into the picture. But interestingly, the Vance group is very nice, very wonderful group. They broke everything, most of them. And on SHA-2 also we have certain kind of attacks which don't really break the whole thing, but it's a step in the direction of breaking. So it is possible that NIST now realizes that they were really concerned about the break on SHA-1. They didn't expect that SHA-1 will be broken so badly. So once they realized that SHA has been broken, they started an effort to find a competition to find a new hash function, and they called it SHA-3. So this competition is still going on, and one of the co-authors of this paper, Praveen Gauravarangan, has given a design. So there were about 72 submissions in the SHA-3 competition, and right now the third stage of the competition is going on, the third and the final stage. So 5 finalists have been selected, and one of them will be the final winner of this competition. So Praveen is the author of one of those 5 designs. So, the point I am making here is these are all general purpose hash functions. So means you can use them in any place you want. And now I come to hash functions that you require on RFID chips. An immediate question is, why do you need hash functions on an RFID chip? So Professor Guang Gong from the University of Waterloo has a wonderful set of slides available on her homepage. So she mentions that RFID protocols, the kind of things like you go to Delhi Metro and you check in through that Metro card. So the authentication protocol which is taking place actually uses one of the cryptographic primitives. Either it is using a block cipher or a stream cipher or a hash function. Delhi Metro in particular uses a block cipher. But the security of the card, the block cipher used on the card is much better than the security used on the token. So if somebody is trying to break the security, don't try the card, try to break the token. The token is much weaker than the card. So they use a variant of DES on the card. So they use a firewire card which is DES, and that is why it is very difficult to break. But the problem with those designs is, either you could use a block cipher or a stream cipher or a hash function, but the problem with the RFID is that you don't have too much computation power. So you require, and you don't also have enough space. So you require a primitive which doesn't require too many gates to implement, which is quite fast and which does not require too much power. So that is why it gives a new area of research on the design of RFID authentication protocols. And there is a protocol which somebody designed, so which is where I will bring to Tau 128. So now the Feldhofer and Deschberger, this group in Austria, they evaluated the implementation of lots of hash functions, and they found that all the standard hash functions that I have shown in the previous slide, they require tremendous number of gates. None of these hash functions listed here require less than 10,000 gates to implement, and 10,000 XOR gate or AND gates, NOR gates, they are very costly, and they are also going to dissipate a lot of power. So this requires us to special purpose hash function design, which are useful for arithmetic chips, which require much less number of gates to implement. And Tau 128 is one such hash function. So this is designed by Paris Lopez and others for an RFID authentication protocol. This requires about about 1/4 to the number of gates required by the other protocols. So, the other hash functions. So the standard hash functions would typically require more than 10,000 gates. This one requires about 2,500 or 2,600 gates. That is the order. So this also uses Merkle-Damgard construction, and that is the reason I put a slide for the Damgard construction. And the compression function we were talking about. So the compression function takes a state of 160 bits. It gets a message word of 32 bits and produces a new state of 160 bits. So let's go back to this picture again. So this is the kind of thing. So this compression function f for tau 128, it takes this IV to be 160 bits. This H1 also is 160 bits. And this message is 32 bits. And you can break any big message into chunks of 32 bits and reapply it again and again and again. And finally here, this transformation G is from 160 bits to 128 bits. So again, it's a small compression. So this is what the tau 128 hash function is. So now I would show how it is slightly modified. This Merkle-Damgard construction. So what they are doing is the message is coming like this. So message M0, message M1, message M2, message MK-1. These K blocks of message being compressed in this fashion. And in the IV, we say there are actually 5 registers of 32 bits each. So the first one is called A0. I have put a subscript 0 here just to denote that it is before the beginning of any round. After one round of compression, it would become A1, 0, then it would become A2, 0 and so on. And the state is given by 4 registers, S0, 1, 2, 3. So these are the 4 registers, and each of these 5 register values is 32 bits. So total 160 bits input. And the changes now take place because of the compression function. They become A0 of 1, S of I, 0 to 3. So S of 1, S of 2, S of 3, S of K, 0, 1, 2, 3. And finally, this compression function does nothing but it simply chops off this register A part. Doesn't bother about the register A. It produces the state S as the output. So there are 4 words of 32 bits each. So the output size is 128 bits. Now I show the picture of the compression function F. What is this compression function F doing? So there are 4 non-linear functions A, B and C, D designed in this manner. So you start with a message M, which is passed to these 2 strands. One goes to the function A, the other goes to the function B. Then you have an IV. So this IV goes to this function A and this function B. So here we are calling it H0 and here we are calling it H1. Because after the function A operates on these 2 inputs, message and H0, it will modify the H0 and it will become some new H0 here. And in this side, the function B will operate on H1 and M, and it will modify, it will be a new value for H1. These new values of H go to the non-linear function C and D in 1 round, 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round. So in this round, the first word S0 is modified. So these 2 new H0 and H1 come. So this is addition modulo 2 to the power 32 and this is XOR on 32-bit words. So this S0 is going to be made a new S0. Then after the 2nd round, S1 is going to become some new S1. Then here S2 becomes something else and here S3 becomes something else. And the final value which comes out, which is obtained by addition modulo 2 to the power 32 of the modified values of H0 and H1, becomes the new value of A0 for the next round. So this A0 will be coming here and the next block of the message M will be coming there. So this is how it will keep on rotating. Now the point is, I have tried to first study what are the properties of these nonlinear functions A and B, the properties of the nonlinear functions C and D. And I find very interesting observations. So first is that the collisions on the function A alone are very easy to find. So I'm not going to go into the details of how do you find and what are the properties and so on, the weight patterns. So that is the combinatorial study of the functions, the constituents of the which are available on the paper which I wrote for this, which is available on my research page. Anybody is interested can have a look. So the properties of function A are such that it is easy to find collisions in the function A alone. It's easy to find collisions in the function B alone. but it is very difficult to find a collision on the combined functions A and B. What I mean by a combined function A and B is that you start with a message M, and the initial A0 is the IV value given to you, so you don't have a choice, it is specified to you. You take that IV and the given message and get this S0 and H1. Can you find another message M dash with the same IV which will give you the same S0 and H1? That is the question. And it appears it is extremely difficult. So this is the idea. So we start with M of H0 and M of H1. Initially H1, H0 and H1 are the same values. And can you find the collisions at this level just after A and B? So we found that this function A of H0M, B of H1M concatenated together, where H0 and H1 are the initial IV values, it's a permutation. So there doesn't exist a collision at this level. So no matter how hard you can try to find M and M dash, which will collide, at this level it doesn't happen because it's a permutation. And that's a wonderful design actually, because now you can't treat this A and B as black boxes. You have to go into the combinatorics of the functions to even attempt to find. And in this case, for this particular IV, you cannot find a collision because these are permutations. So you need to find at least two block collisions. And when you try to find two block collisions, the cost of finding two messages, 32-bit plus 32-bit, so 64-bit message and another 64-bit message, the cost of searching for it will become too large. So, in fact, we verified that for the given IV, we exhaustively searched over these 2 to the power 32 possible messages, and we found that it is actually a permutation, so there is no collision. So we don't deny that there may exist two block collisions, and in fact I expect there will be two block collisions, but the cost is little high. So now what we did is, the design actually has certain weaknesses. So you are starting from this M H0, M H0, and you are passing these two A and B functions. Initially the H0 is the IV value, as I said, and you pass the first round of C and D. And now the design has a strange weakness. The designers do not use the message M anywhere below. So the message M only comes at the top level and it is not used anywhere else. So if you could find a collision at this level, immediately after the iteration of one round of C and D functions, the state, the first word of the state is going to be changed here. S0 will be changed to something else. Still the S1, S2 and S3 are same. And if we have a collision at this level, if this H0 value and this H1 value are same for two different messages, then everything else will simply remain the same. So that is the next idea. So the next question is, can we find a collision at this level? And I found by some analysis that this CD function is not a permutation. So it is possible to find a collision. And once you have a collision, then the simple way of finding a collision would be, you try all possible 2 to the power 32 messages, list them here at the level of C and D, one round of C and D, and just make a list out of them. And then try to look for, is there any value where this H0 value and H1 values are colliding after this one round of CD? But the problem with this approach is that if you try all 2 to the power 32 messages and you store H0 and H1 values for each one of them, then the size of the file that you create would be of the order of 128 GB. Now how do you sort this file? Because you have to look for a collision. So the best thing would be to sort this file and then look for any two rows which have identical H0, H1. So you could simply write the file in this manner. First column will contain H0 at this level after one round of C and D. Next column will contain the value H1, and then the third column will contain the message M for which this value came. And then you sort this file and look for two rows consecutively, one after the other, in which this H0, H1 part is same. And then you produce this next values, the message 1 and message 2, and claim that these two messages will have the same collision, the same value for both the states. That would be essentially the attack. Now how do you implement such an attack? Because as we said, the cost of implementing is now very, very high. A 128 GB file sorting would take a tremendous amount of time. So this basically sorting would take n log n. So you can't really do. The cost is going to be about 2 to the power more than 40 or 2 to the power 45, something like that. So 2 to the power 45 effort, at least I was trying it on a simple PC and I didn't have too much computational power with me. So at best I could try it, I could have few more computers join and in a random search. So I could probably try some part on this, some part of this, and combine the files together and then sort. But the question of sorting would still remain. So the sorting was not easy unless I have a cluster of computers with me. So I devised a new strategy. I said that what we would do is that we would use a disk sort. So, and then I found a tool, psort, which is available online. Some professor has written this tool, available, and the reference is given in the paper. But the tool breaks down beyond about 10 GB of file. So beyond 10 GB of file, it doesn't work. So I divided this 128 GB file into 16 chunks of 8 GB and sorted each one of them separately, and then finally wrote a merge sort algorithm. So merged these files and produced a final file. And then another code to look for in this finally sorted file, produce these messages. And that can be done in approximately 2 to the power 37 efforts. So it gives me a saving of about 2 to the power 8 or 2 to the power 9 from the original sort that I could have tried on the whole file. And 2 to the power 37 is the kind of the code which we can run in approximately 1 day on a PC. So I ran the program for about a day, and next day I had all the results. The cost of this attack is about 1/4 of 2 to the power 32 invocations of the whole hash function. And then the sorting and searching part. So the sorting and searching part, approximately this comes out to be about 2 to the power 37 is the effort. Now the birthday bound has told that if it is a 128-bit hash function, then you require about 2 to the power 64 effort to break, whereas we require only 2 to the power 37. So this is a very, very bad break for this hash function. And this is essentially unusable hash function. Then we also did a second pre-image attack. So I wouldn't go into too many details of the second pre-image attack. The idea of second pre-image attack is that you have a message and you are trying to find out another message which will hash to the same value. So you just write a message like this: M1 first block, M1 second block, M1 10th block. And now you are looking for another message. So all you need to do is, on this message M1, the first block of the message, try to find an M21, the first block of the second message, so that there is a collision. And you know that collisions are going to exist, and the analysis is given in the paper. The probability of the collision would be about 2 to the power minus 29. So you expect in about 2 to the power 1 by 2 to the power 29 probability, you will find a message here. So if you can find such a message, then you concatenate the rest of the messages same, and you have a second pre-image attack. Suppose you can't find on this particular message M1 because the probability is involved, then you just take this first message is this. Now look for the same collision on the second block. So what we are doing here is the second pre-image attack is being run by the collision attack that we just found. And if you have a sufficiently long message, you will be able to find the second pre-image. The cost of the second pre-image attack comes to about 2 to the power 62 calls. And typically you would require this message to be very large, of the order of 2 to the power 29 or 2 to the power 32. That is the range. So we don't expect in real life the messages of 2 to the power 32 bits on RFID hash. But what this attack shows is that it at least breaks what is the claimed security level. So it is breaking the claimed security level of the hash. So I would conclude with this idea that tab 128 is insecure to be used in any application, not just RFID application, but any application shouldn't be used, because we have found break against two of the important properties of the hash function. But at the same time, this design philosophy is very interesting. So the first part, the A and B function part gave us a permutation. This could be useful as a nice primitive to be designed in some other cryptographic hash functions which are required to be implemented in a very low gate count. So that particular part is very interesting. And if the designers had been able to find a good CD function which was also giving a permutation, then it would have been very difficult and our attack wouldn't have worked. So the point of this research still valid. The design philosophy is still right, but they didn't find a permutation. So that is the weakness their design has. And it seems possible that some security proofs can be done on this design for this particular variant when both parts AB and CD are permutations. But for the given type hash function, it doesn't hold, of course. And sometimes it so happens that collision resistance may not be required for the particular protocol in which you are using this hash function. In those cases also, it could be fine to use this design. So this is where I will conclude. Thank you very much.